Here's a painful truth. Most people don't lose opportunities because they're not talented. They lose them because they don't know how to connect with people. One careless criticism, one ignored name, one argument you didn't need to win, and doors quietly close. In How to Win Friends and Influence People, Dale Carnegie reveals why making people feel important can transform your relationships, career, and influence. But the biggest mistake most people make comes later. And what this book reveals next can completely change the way you communicate forever. Stay with me, because by the end of this journey, you'll understand why people trust, follow, and remember some individuals, while others are simply forgotten. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Book Bonnie, where books speak. In every episode, we bring you powerful insights from famous and popular English books so that the wisdom of every great book can reach your heart. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our latest uploads. Now let's begin a new journey together into the world of books.
I am so excited for this deep dive. This material, it's really foundational stuff.
It totally is. I mean, we all think we know how to deal with people, right?
Oh, absolutely. We think we're experts.
But the wild part is our default instincts. They're almost always completely wrong.
Yeah, 100%.
So to really get into this, I want to take you back to, it was May 1931, New York City.
Oh, the Crowley manhunt.
Yes. 150 police officers have this notorious criminal pinned down in a top-floor apartment. They've got tear gas. They have machine guns on the rooftops. It's crazy.
Like a movie scene. 10,000 people just crowded in the streets watching this massive shootout.
Exactly. And this guy, Two-Gun Crowley, he was, just days prior, a police officer walked up to his parked car, just asked for his license, and Crowley just pulls a pistol and shoots the guy dead.
Just cold blood.
Yeah.
And the police commissioner actually went record calling him a guy who would kill at the drop of a feather.
Right. But here is the detail that just defies all logic. While he's crouching behind a chair, dodging bullets, bleeding all over this paper, he writes a letter to whom it may concern.
Yeah, and what does he write? It's incredible.
He literally writes, "Under my coat is a weary heart, but a kind one that would do nobody any harm."
It's an insane level of delusion.
Right. A guy who just committed murder, who's actively shooting at cops, genuinely thinks his core identity is kind and harmless.
And that's the perfect entry point for the first major lesson here. The boomerang of criticism. Source material points out that it wasn't just Crowley. Look at Al Capone, right?
Oh, the Chicago mob boss.
Yeah, arguably the most sinister gang leader there. He actually complained publicly that he spent his life giving people a good time and all he got was abuse. He literally viewed himself as an unappreciated public benefactor.
Wow. So if gangsters don't blame themselves.
Exactly. If the most violent people construct this mental framework where they are the hero, then, the person who cut you off in traffic or the coworker who totally botched a deadline, they absolutely have that same defense mechanism.
Okay, let's unpack this, because
Yeah.
the text uses this analogy, right? Criticisms are like homing pigeons. They always return home. But let me give you some pushback here.
Sure, go for it.
Think about this for a moment. What if someone on your team is doing something genuinely dangerous, like a construction worker refusing to wear a hard hat? You can't just ignore that. Don't you have a responsibility to scold them?
Well, you have a responsibility to change the behavior, but, and here's the catch, criticism is the absolute worst tool for the job.
Really? Even for safety?
Especially for safety. The material brings up this great historical example of a safety coordinator, George B. Johnston. His whole job was enforcing the hard hat rule. At first, he used his authority. He'd see a guy without a hat, point to the rule book, and scold him.
And let me guess, the second he walked away, the hat came off.
Exactly. Because of psychological reactance. You scold someone, you threaten their autonomy, they rebel to prove they're still in control. So Johnston changed tactics.
What did he do?
He'd walk up and just ask, like in a friendly way, if the hat was uncomfortable, or if it didn't fit right. Then he'd gently remind them it was just there to protect them from injury.
Oh, wow. So he stopped being the enforcer.
Right, he bypassed their defensive triggers. And compliance skyrocketed with zero resentment. B.F. Skinner, the famous psychologist, proved this. Animals and humans learn way faster and retain it longer when rewarded for good behavior, rather than punished for bad.
So the actionable takeaway here is, if you want to change behavior, you have to drop the condemnation. It just puts people on the defensive.
Psychologist Hans Selye said it perfectly. As much as we thirst for approval, we dread condemnation.
If you'd like to explore this book in greater depth, consider reading the original version. You'll find the purchase link in the YouTube products section. So, okay, if condemnation triggers this defense and we're all thirsty for approval, What is that thirst exactly?
Well, that moves us to the next big lesson, the deepest human craving.
Right, because to actually influence people, you have to know what they're hungry for.
What's fascinating here is how the source leans on philosophers like John Dewey and Sigmund Freud. Freud said everything we do comes from two motives, the sex urge and the desire to be great.
And Dewey called it the desire to be important.
Right. Yes. And it's so deep that it's basically the main thing separating us from animals.
The examples the text uses for this are wild. It compares John Dillinger, the bank robber, to John D. Rockefeller, the billionaire.
Complete opposites on paper.
Exactly. Rockefeller uses his money to build a massive hospital in China for people he'll never meet. Meanwhile, Dillinger is robbing banks and shouting, "I'm Dillinger!" to terrified tellers.
But the biological drive is identical. Both men are just chasing the exact same dopamine hit of feeling significant. How you choose to get that feeling of importance dictates your character.
That makes so much sense. I mean, we feed our families roast beef to give them physical energy, but we completely neglect to nourish their self-esteem. We just leave them starving for importance.
And that starvation is your biggest opportunity. Look at Charles Schwab, one of the first executives in America to make $1 million salary.
Back when $1 million was, well, a lot more than it is now.
Right. And his secret wasn't steel manufacturing. He said his secret was arousing enthusiasm. He was hearty in his approbation and lavish in his praise. Criticism kills ambition, but approval nourishes it.
Okay, but wait, ask yourself honestly, isn't praising people constantly just flattery? I feel like people today have a radar for that. They can see right through it.
It's a huge difference, actually. The text doesn't advocate for flattery at all. Flattery is counterfeit. It's selfish. You're just telling someone what they already think about themselves to get what you want.
Like greasing the wheels.
Exactly. But sincere appreciation, that requires you to actually pay attention. You have to step outside your own ego.
Oh, like the Stevie Wonder story?
Yes, tell that way. It's so good.
So there was this teacher in Detroit who asked a young blind student to help her find a mouse lost in the classroom. Instead of just generic flattery, she appreciated a specific trait. She told him nature had given him these remarkable ears, and she truly needed his unique hearing to find the mouse.
She validated a strength he was probably insecure about.
And he later said that single act of genuine appreciation completely changed his life. It awakened this confidence. Sincere appreciation is about finding a real strength and holding a mirror up to it.
So the takeaway for this lesson, stop giving cheap flattery. Find one genuine thing to appreciate about the person in front of you today. It can literally change their trajectory.
Love that. But the most important lesson is still ahead. Because once we know people crave importance, how do we get them to do what we want?
Baiting the hook to suit the fish.
Right. Like, say I'm negotiating a contract or just trying to get my kid to eat vegetables. How do I move from making them feel good to action?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's about Lloyd George, the British Prime Minister during World War I. His secret to staying in power was simple. You don't fish with strawberries and cream just because you like them.
Right. The fish don't care about your strawberries.
Exactly. Fish want worms. It sounds obvious, but we are so obsessed with our own desires.
It's true. I mean, we have this crazy egocentric bias, like the story with Ralph Waldo Emerson trying to get a calf into a barn.
Oh, that's a classic.
He's pushing from behind, his son is pulling from the front. They are just sweating, totally focused on what they want.
And the calf just stiffens its legs.
Yeah.
It's experiencing that same reactance we talked about.
Until the Irish housemaid walks by. She doesn't write brilliant essays, but she just thinks about what the calf wants. She lets it suck her finger and leads it right in.
She aligned her goal with the animal's natural instinct.
Have you ever noticed this in your own life? We do this all the time. But taking that from a barn to a business transaction, isn't that just manipulation? Figuring out what they want so we get what we want?
Well, it has to be a win-win. Look at the Shell oil salesman example. He had a gas station owner whose lot was an absolute disaster. Trash everywhere.
And if he just said, hey, clean this up so Shell hits its corporate targets?
The owner wouldn't care. That's strawberries and cream. It would just make the owner dig his heels in.
Yeah.
So the salesman found the worm. He noticed the owner had immense pride in his standing in the local community.
Feeding that desire for importance.
Yes. He pointed out how a pristine station could make him the premier business in the area. Elevated his status.
Yeah.
The lot was spotless the next day. The takeaway here. Success is the ability to get the other person's point of view and see things from their angle.
If you'd like to explore this book in greater depth, consider reading the original version. You'll find the purchase link in the YouTube products section. So we bait the hook. But what you're about to discover changes everything, because disagreements are going to happen.
Oh, inevitably.
How do you handle conflict without triggering that defensive boomerang we talked about earlier?
This is a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah.
You can't win an argument.
Wait, never.
Never. Because even if you destroy their logic, you've destroyed their pride. You win the debate, you lose their goodwill.
Like the guy at the banquet in the book. He hears someone misquote Shakespeare, claiming it's from the Bible, and he just publicly corrects him.
Just humiliated him in front of everyone. And his friend pulls him aside and says, "Why prove a man wrong? Why not let him save his face?"
Here's where it gets really interesting. If we can't argue, how do we persuade?
You use the Socratic method. Get them saying, yes, yes, immediately.
It's like a billiard ball, right? If it's rolling in one direction, it takes a massive amount of force to deflect it. But if you start it rolling in the right direction, it's effortless.
That is a perfect way to look at it. Professor Harry Overstreet has this theory. When a person says no, their entire neuromuscular system sets itself on guard. The amygdala activates.
They literally biologically shut down your argument.
Exactly. But getting those early yeses keeps them open. You lower the defensive threshold. And that ties right into saving face.
Saving face is huge. General Electric did this brilliantly with Charles Steinmetz. He was a genius engineer, but a terrible department head, just failing as a manager.
And highly temperamental. If they fired or demoted him, he would have quit.
So they just gave him a new title, consulting engineer. It was the exact same work, but it sounded prestigious. They saved his ego and fixed the management issue without a drop of resentment.
The actionable takeaway: never back someone into a corner. Always give them a way to save face and start your hard conversations by finding common ground to get a yes.
Okay, but let me push this into the hardest territory, the Novocaine method. Because sometimes you just have to correct someone. An employee's work is subpar, a kid is messing up. If we can't criticize or argue, what do we do?
Think about a dentist. They don't just start drilling a tooth that's massive trauma. They use Novocaine first. The drilling still happens, but the pain is killed. In leadership, praise is the Novocaine.
You anchor it in something positive, like President Coolidge. He needed his secretary to fix her typos. So he walks up and says, "You're wearing a very attractive dress."
Oh, and she blushes, totally shocked.
And then he just drops it. Now, don't get stuck up. I just said that to make you feel good. From now on, please be more careful with your punctuation.
It's so blunt, but the mechanism works. You call attention to the mistake indirectly, and you give them what the text calls a fine reputation to live up to.
I love that concept. Like the homeowner with the messy construction workers, they left debris everywhere. If she yelled, they'd just curse her out and do the bare minimum.
Instead, she goes out and praises their craftsmanship. She gave the Novocaine.
Right. And then casually mentions how beautiful the property looks when the yard is clean. She gave them the reputation of being elite professional.
And to keep that new identity, they couldn't leave trash around. Lowell Thomas did the same thing with a terrified guest who didn't want to play bridge.
Oh, right. The guy was panicking.
Yeah, and Thomas just said, "Bridge is just memory and judgment, and you've written massive articles on memory. It'll be a cinch." He made the fault seem easy to correct by tying it to a strength.
So the takeaway, always start with praise, make the corrections seem easy, and give them a fine reputation to live up to.
Exactly. If you look at everything we've covered, the boomerang effect, the craving for importance baiting the hook, the Novocaine method, the core truth is that humans are emotional, not logical.
We are bristling with prejudices and motivated by pride.
Influence isn't about having the loudest voice or the best math. It's about silencing your ego and feeding their hunger for appreciation.
So what does this all mean for you? The Harvard psychologist William James said we only use a tiny fraction of our physical and mental resources. Imagine the dormant potential in your coworkers, your spouse, your kids.
It's staggering when you think about it.
We live in a world where social media weaponizes our defensiveness. We're constantly corrected and starved for importance. What if you became a pattern interrupt? If everyone is secretly starving to feel important, whose life could you transform today with just one sincere word of appreciation?
It really reframes every interaction.
It really does. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Be sure to tell us in the comments which book you'd like us to summarize next. Book Bainy English, where every book speaks.